Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to take you to the shores of the Dead Sea. We're going to talk about the Qumran Manuscripts, also known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're in the present-day West Bank, Palestine, where shepherds discovered thousands of fragments in 1947. Once reassembled, these fragments revealed scrolls on which we found sacred writings from the Bible. Until then, nothing very special, except that it's an absolutely immense treasure for humanity, for all of us. Because here in Qumran, we have the oldest versions of the Bible. In this video, we will also ask ourselves, who could have written the Qumran manuscripts? When they could have been written, how they could have already had access at that time to all the information that we would find in the Gospels a few hundred years later. And also, we will ask ourselves why the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden in caves. You'll also see, my friends, by exploring the Dead Sea Scrolls, we understand that the Bible we have in our hands today has not always been the same. Among the corpus of all the texts available to compose the Bible, at some point, there were decision makers who asked themselves the question, which texts are we going to include in our Bible, our own? And you will see that depending on how we interpret certain texts found in the Qumran manuscripts, the meaning of the Bible could have been completely different. These Qumran manuscripts immerse us in the hidden phase 4 of the Bible. We'll explore why in this video. Well, because on these scrolls, we have Psalms that are not part of the Bible. We have Psalms in our current Bible that are not part of the Qumran scrolls. And also, among others, we have the Book of Enoch with 12 complete copies. While it is present in only one version of the Bible worldwide, the Ethiopian Bible, so thanks to the Qumran manuscripts. Well, these are secrets that have finally been revealed after being hidden for nearly 2 millennia, and others that remain hidden, but this time on the internet. It's those using CyberGhost VPN, the channel's partner, if you're unfamiliar with VPNs, actually. It's software that lets you connect to the internet anonymously and securely to protect your browsing data. Which means goodbye to intrusive ads, goodbye to the resale of your personal data. And on top of that, it also lets you access blocked content, like Netflix for example. This varies if you connect from France, Great Britain, or the United States. Also, the software can unblock over 35 streaming platforms, including Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and more. CyberGhost leads in internet security with over 38 million users and is one of the top recommended VPNs on Trustpilot, the leading user review site. When you connect through CyberGhost, your computer's IP address, which is like its identification card, will be hidden and your browsing will be redirected, thanks to 7,000 servers spread across 90 countries. With CyberGhost, no user data is stored. Completely anonymous, completely ghost. For those who aren't very tech savvy, honestly, go for it. It's super easy to use, and on top of that, you can use it on 7 different devices with a single account. So it's either for you, your different devices, or for the whole family. Compatible with Mac, Windows, iOS, Android, smart television game consoles, Linux, and more. And since CyberGhost is the channel's partner, in the description you'll find a link to access your special offer. Save up to 84%, it's just $1.94 monthly, less than a liter of gas, and you get 4 months free. But that's not all. Because if you're not convinced, our subscriptions come with a 45-day money-back guarantee, and there's also a team available who speaks French. 24/7 to answer all your questions. So don't hesitate any longer, disappear from the intrusive radars of the internet right now by joining the CyberGhost VPN community. And on our side, we're going to dive into the hidden side of the Bible with the Dead Sea Scrolls under certain. Some see in the Qumran manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, proof that the Bible is a falsified text. But that's not the case. Subtitles French, 2021. Subtitles French, 2021. Some of the texts from the Dead Mother's manuscripts date back to before the birth of Jesus, with very detailed descriptions of Judea and how Judaism was practiced there. Other texts, on the other hand, date from the time of Christ. It is believed that the writing of the very first biblical text began about 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. It was also during this time, a few centuries before our era, that the Bible saw its first translations. For the Jews, who at that time no longer spoke Hebrew but now knew Aramaic or simply Greek. These scrolls contain the oldest known copy of the Ten Commandments and texts about the apocalypse. These scrolls include 45 Deuteronomy, 41 Psalms, 30 Genesis, and 27 Exodus copies, and all the rest. I'll refrain from listing them all so I don't make you fall asleep so early in the video, but I'll put them on the screen for you anyway. These texts were written by the Essenes. The Essenes were a movement within Judaism that flourished from the 2nd century before Christ. Some consider them to have been a sect, but in any case, this movement was made up of only 400 people. The longest of the manuscripts found at Qumran is 7 meters long and contains the entire book of Isaiah as it appears in the Old Testament. It's even more incredible because it's nearly intact. But who wrote this and why were they hidden? Not far from the place where the manuscripts were found are the ruins of the city of Qumran. There we find nearly 70 bodies of men, all buried in the same way. Could these be the authors of the manuscripts? It's not impossible because the bodies are the same age as the biblical scrolls, which describe a group of men called the Sons of Light living apart from the world without family, women, or money. The fact that being able to date the period in which these men lived confirms that the existence of the Essenes lasted at least until the 1st century of our era. Indeed, excavations begun in the early 1950s uncovered the ruins of what was the first monastery of Western culture. Certainly the term may not be the most appropriate, but since we are in the cradle of Judeo-Christian civilization, it has since been accepted. We are indeed facing a monastery of so-called Western culture. When we try to reconstruct our history, it is always risky to reject new elements on the grounds that they do not match what we think we know. The German anthropologist Olaf Rohrer said so himself. If what has always been said about the Essenes is true, then the people who lived at Qumran are certainly not Essenes. On the other hand, if they really are, then the description that has been made of them until now was false. The Essenes took a vow never to disclose their esoteric knowledge to anyone and to devote themselves completely to purity. That's why they frequently used the mikvehs, the Jewish ritual baths. Those who wrote these texts described what God would do when the Messiah, the awaited king and prophet, arrived. The way the sentences are written is similar to what you can read in the Gospels of Matthew, Joshua, and Luke. And this, 200 years before they wrote their Gospels. Even more remarkable than the content are the striking similarities in phrasing and structure found in the Gospel of Matthew. Yet, even though we discovered these texts in 1947, did Matthew or Luke know about them when they wrote their verses? Could they have copied them after coming across the text before abandoning them in the unreachable caves? Or are we still missing a written link connecting the Dead Sea manuscripts to the Gospels of Luke and Matthew? Well, not really. That's what's troubling. Because the Sons of Light, as they are even called in the manuscripts, seem to explain why they hid them. Hard to believe that 200 years later, they were found, before becoming a source of inspiration for Christianity, and then being hidden again afterwards. The texts also state that the manuscripts are precious and should be preserved and passed on to future generations. That has been done in a way, since they talk about subjects found in the Bible, but then if they were meant to be passed on, why were they hidden? It's possible that the authors of the manuscripts hid them to protect them at a time when they were seeking refuge from the Roman army's attack on Jerusalem and the region in 68. The only issue is the massacre was so severe that the Sons of Light would have died, sometimes buried in Jerusalem or the Qumran cemetery. The presence of verses from the book of Joshua is interesting because it questions the historical legitimacy of biblical texts. Before we combined the Gospels into a single text, which we now call the Bible, all the texts existed independently on scrolls like those from Qumran. Because of the journey of each one, some texts could end up being copied more than others. In the Qumran manuscripts, we count all the copies that I listed for you a little earlier, but only 2 meager copies of the book of Joshua, and for example, no copies of the book of Esther. Was the Bible made up of books and gospels of which we had the most copies? And what about this final corpus if some of the books present had ultimately been replaced by others? We must remember that the Bible and its books vary by religion and faith. These religions and faiths have all chosen to include some books rather than others, and to place them in different orders within what would become the final version of their Bible. These choices were made mainly according to what the decision makers of the time, at the very beginning of our era, considered on the usefulness of including this or that book, or the order in which they should be arranged so that each one could have the greatest possible impact individually. That's why you won't find the Book of Enoch anywhere, for example, except in a single official Bible. You'll see, we'll talk about it a little later in the video. Another immensely interesting fact about the Book of Isaiah that we just talked about. It's not its presence or its placement within the different Bibles that interests us, but rather the message it conveys. Indeed, on the Isaiah scroll found at Qumran, there are annotations indicating which vowels should be added to the Hebrew consonants. Adding different vowels to Hebrew words can turn them into verbs or nouns, often changing their meanings entirely. The most surprising part is that Qumran's handwritten annotations sometimes create meanings that differ from the original annotations. The Masoretes were people in charge of faithfully transmitting the textual form of the Hebrew Bible, but above all, nuances of pronunciation and vocalization. At a time when the languages in which the Bible had been written had become dead languages, the composition and interpretation of the Bible aren't fixed or guaranteed to be fully faithful to everything ever written. The same applies to the text order of the Psalms. For example, in the Qumran version of the Book of Psalms, Psalms 32 and 34 are missing. These absences recur in nearly all scrolls discovered in the late 1940s. So at the very beginning of our era, the list and order of the Psalms were not yet fixed. The opposite is also true. Some Qumran manuscripts have psalms that are not found in the Bible as we know it. For example, the Book of Tobit was written in Aramaic in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But in Israel at that time, Aramaic was not officially spoken, so why was Aramaic used to write certain passages like those in the first version? Perhaps the original Book of Enoch? It's important to understand that the Book of Enoch is not merely an esoteric fad. It just so happens that it wasn't included in any known Bible except for the Ethiopian Bible, which is the most complete Bible, if we can say so with 80 books. If there are excerpts from the Book of Enoch written in Greek, until now it was only in Ethiopian that its only complete version could be found. Thanks to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we now have the oldest known version of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic produced. Hold on, in 12 copies, that's a huge amount of text. When you know that the Book of Enoch is almost the same size as the Book of Isaiah and it's 7 meters in length. The Book of Enoch, this apocryphal text, in other words, this hidden text, helps to shed light on passages that remained somewhat obscure. For some, the giants in the Book of Enoch are seen as evidence that giants once walked the earth. We should dial back the enthusiasm since the giants in the Book of Enoch are clearly symbolic. They are given a size of 3,000 cubits, which is roughly 1.5 kilometers tall. Even more incredible, some psalms were not known in Hebrew, but only in Greek, the language of the West. So these manuscripts for some passages written in Hebrew are the only known Hebrew version. If the authors of the text are behind the oldest biblical traces we know, some express some uncertainty about these authors. Indeed, the scrolls were found exclusively in the caves and never at the Qumran archaeological site. But these people forget the massacre that the Sons of Light were trying to escape. A logical, plausible hypothesis, but it can't be fully verified. That's what makes this subject fascinating. If archaeology, history, and anthropology have provided clues about Qumran's life and occupation chronology, it still remains true that no one can say with certainty who the scribes were who produced these 900 scrolls. And above all, where they got this knowledge from, since they belong to a movement cut off from the world. But if the Essenes really are the origin of these texts, how is it that they were never mentioned in the Bible? That's a question I might try to answer after more research in a future video. In my view, this highlights the many mysteries still surrounding the origins of the Qumran manuscripts and the history of biblical texts. Despite these mysteries, it's undeniable that the Dead Sea Scrolls are one of the greatest treasures in all of our history. The Dead Sea Scrolls are one of the greatest treasures in all of our history.